Racism means basically like
a large part of a race feels that they're superior to another race. And so not only do they believe that, but they act on it.
Examples would be in class. Sometimes I'd be the only black kid, and we read a book like, I don't know, Huck Finn, and then there's that uncomfortable moment, the magic word would come up, and people would look at you and like, what's his reaction, and things like that.
I was walking home from school with this one white girl, and we just gone off the bus, and we were almost home, and there were these group of black kids that just gone out of school, and she was like, oh, let's cross the street, there's a group of black kids, I don't want to run into them. And so she told me, which I don't even know why she would do that.
I used to wear a sweatband, like, just to reinforce my wrist. And I had a teacher come up to me and say, you should take it off because it looks gang affiliated.
I've been in situations where, I had to cross the street because I didn't want to scare the white lady that was walking.
It would get to the point where I would start to count how many times a woman would clutch her bag.
When I was 16, I was leaving my mom's house in my pajamas, which had snowmen on them, with my brother, and we were actually stopped by the police rather aggressively.
I've been stopped by the cops on my way between classes because we have two separate buildings, walking from one building to the other building, as my white students in the same class walk by me.
It's kind of upsetting because we live in a world where my mom has to be afraid when I walk outside from the people that are like meant to protect me. And I don't like when my mother feels like that. I love my mother. I want her to always be happy.
I walk tall, I keep my head up, try to be very articulate and polite. And so, of course, I was like, okay, I'm going to be fine because I act a certain way. And of course, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. The way people perceive you, is not up to you.
My parents taught me, cops are your friends, you're supposed to, they're here to protect you, but all I'm seeing is the opposite. So how can I not be afraid when I feel like I'm being hunted? When I feel like I'm there to fill a quota?
We are in a so-called free society, and as a black man, we literally don't feel free. We don't know what freedom is.
Every time we're killed, the first thing you see on the news is, criminal record, or something like that. So from the second the bullet hits us, already we're starting to be dehumanized.
With black people like myself, we don't get as many chances as they do. So you have to be aware and you have to watch out and you can't mess up.
This was an extremely emotionally taxing process for me in terms of coming to terms with maybe the nature of racism in my own life and in this country and in this world. And if you wait until somebody is 12, 13, and 14 to put that on them, it can be really difficult.
My dad, he's just like the honest one. He's like, listen, son, like there are things in this world, like you kind of have to watch out. He doesn't want me to live in fear, but he wants me to be aware.
I want people to know that I'm perfectly fine and I'm not gonna hurt anybody or do anything bad.
I should be judged about like who I am and what kind of person I am.
My parents would tell me, especially my mom, she would tell me, you have to endure, you have to muscle through it. And this is no different. It's a part of being a person of color in America.
And there's a certain comfortability associated with that, because if I know that something is inevitable, then I know how to deal with it. Fortunately, I've had parents who have said, this is what you do.
Mom and Dad, I'll be fine because you did a good job raising me. You gave me all the resources and the time and the blood, sweat, and tears to make me a good man, an honorable man, and the foundation to survive in this country.
I want you to know that I will act in an appropriate manner and do everything that you told me to do, because I do love you, and I know that everything you say is not for a reason and not just to talk, and I love you.
black man in America, I feel fractured. I feel like the mask that you see in the Greek plays, that's double-sided, both smiling and sad at the same time.
As a black man in America, I have to be careful of the situations I'm put in. I have to be careful of the certain things I wear and how I act in front of the public. I believe majority of the white people see us as gangbangers, drug dealers, and thugs for the simple fact that they see us all the same, whether we're doctors, architects, etc.
Thank you all for joining us today as we have an open and honest conversation. Here with us today, we have Earl Gator, Will Jenkins, David Chun, and Cameron Bean. We will be having a discussion to really dig in and talk about our feelings, our thoughts around our current realities. We're going to start off with you, Will. You just finished Oakwood University. Congratulations. We are all so very proud of you. You're about to enter a new phase of your life, a more independent phase. You're going to hear comments, if you haven't already, such as, I don't see color. It's not about race. Talk about how that makes you feel, and what is your response to that?
So I'll first start off with how I feel. There are many emotions that I feel when I hear those statements, and on a general sense, I feel offended and I feel confused. And I think there are two different people who say those things. I think people who say, I don't see color, don't really understand what they're saying or understand the meaning behind what they're saying. On the surface level, I don't see color might think, regardless of how we look or the differences I see in you, I'm disregarding those differences, and I believe that you should be treated equally, that we should have the same opportunities as I have, and that we should both be treated the same. However, I think that we need to see those differences. You need to see color, because when you see color, you see those inequalities. Because the system that we live in sees color and sees those differences. And I believe that regardless of those differences, we should both be equal. Now, for people who say it's not about race, I first would tell them that, well, that's a lie. And then second, I would ask them, how is it not about race? Because it's always been about race. Since the beginning of 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to 1865 with the Voting Rights Act, to Jim Crow laws, to now, in the 21st century, it has always been about race. And if you don't think it's about race, then what world do you live in? What society do you live in? Because the system that we live in has always been about race.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open it up to some of our other panelists. Is this something that you have encountered, heard? What are some things that you have shared with people when you are hearing these types of comments? Chime in. What are your thoughts? What are your experiences?
Well, I think anybody who's older has had to have that experience at some point in time. It's impossible or it's ingenuous to say that you haven't. What I readily tell people now is, it is race, color, no matter how you want to see it, because I always challenge people, especially if they bring up the black friend or whatnot. I'm like, we're at work or when we're out. I was like, you're an associate. Don't even call me a friend. And I know a lot of people, my friends, will say, man, you're being rude. And I'm like, no, you can have associates and you can be kind to people. You can be pleasant. But I said, a friend is someone who knows my hopes and dreams. A friend is someone who comes to my house. A friend is someone who knows my wife and my children's names, someone I break bread with, how many people who aren't or who don't look like you do you do that with on a consistent basis? Because I'll tell them, I'm just like you, just in reverse. I don't have that many Caucasian friends who come to my house. But that is the society that we live in. So you have to work hard to get outside of that bubble, to truly have friends who can understand your issues. Because unless someone is truly a friend of yours, they're not going to understand your pain. They're not going to understand the strife, the trials that you go through. So, I mean, it's something that I say all the time. It is what it is. People, human nature, whether people choose to accept it or not.
Powerful. And I think that what you brought up here, I mean, which we don't always want to make that differentiation between associates and friends, but it's actually a very powerful concept in that we sometimes loosely use that term. Oh, I have Facebook friends, friends. But what does that really mean, especially as we begin to talk about heavy, deep topics? Because as David shared with us, someone that's your friend, you expect more from them. And so that changes the trajectory of where we're going. Thank you for that response. Earl, I want you to chime in with us and let us know, tell us about your experience with the justice system as a black man.
Wow, that's a loaded request there. My experience was not good at all. Has not ever been from start to finish. There's nothing just about the justice system. Nothing just about the justice system. At least I haven't seen it in any fashion, shape, or form. From the time you have a situation with the police, all the way to courts, to incarceration, there's nothing just about that system at all. I could never say that there is.
So I'm going to push you a little bit. When you say there's nothing just about the justice system, from your experience, for someone that may have always thought, of course, the justice system is fair. Our forefathers created this system in which your peers and your neighbors and people who are like you are helping to determine whether or not what someone did is right or wrong. When you say the justice system is not just, can you help unpack that and reveal to people who may not understand what you're saying, what do you mean by it's not just? Give us an example.
My personal experience, the best example I can come up with was when I first found out that the police wanted to question me on something that they thought I was involved in. My mother, I'll never forget, she told me, "No, I don't want you talking to the police." I was in Nashville at the time, and I was like, well, I don't have anything to be afraid of. And so I made my way to Murfreesboro, and I met with the police. And from there, that's when, looking in hindsight, from there I realized that there was a motive. There was a ulterior motive behind everything that they did. And I was oblivious to it. So it was nothing just about it from the start, and it kept on going from then on.
And so what I hear you saying is this idea of agendas. Like, you may thinking, feeling, or knowing, I wasn't a part of this. They just want to talk to me. And it ended up being much more than that. And sometimes we don't see that, or you were not able to see that until you were in the presence of it. And at that point, it's often too late, especially for our black males. It reminds me of, many of you, if not all of you, probably have seen When They See Us, and I know different people have different perspectives about whether they want to watch it or not, because it can be very emotionally draining. But, what you're mentioning kind of resonates and reminds me of that, where you have the innocence of black males feeling like this system can work for me, so all I have to do is tell them I did or didn't, and I'll be okay. But we're seeing that the system does not always work like that. We are going to, Cameron, you are the youngest person on our panel today. We are so happy to have you. You're a rising sophomore in high school. And we want to hear from you. What are your feelings about the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, which I'm sure you've heard about? It's been all over social media and the news and everything. How does it make you feel as a young black male?
Well, number one, technology is like a real blessing, because without technology, we wouldn't have known anything about these two black males, and we would have got the same response that we always get, that it was just another police brutality, and like a white cop, just kills another black man. Like, we get that all the time, and I just think it's like a real blessing to have technology, because we get to actually see the actual footage and like the actual proof, and people of different races, like white people, they can like see just how how their race is like just abusing us in a certain way. And another thing is about the George Floyd video. The cops were just they kept ignoring George when he said, "I can't breathe." They kept ignoring the fact that he couldn't breathe. And the thing that really made me like upset was when the Asian cop said like, "Don't do drugs, kids. It's bad for you." And then the lady, I was agreeing with the lady, and the other black male, he was saying that has nothing to deal with it, because if it had to deal with it, you wouldn't put your knee on someone's neck to the point where they can barely breathe. And I just think that was crazy. Another thing is, yesterday I watched this. There was like a post on Instagram, and this white man was apparently accused for murder of two people, and he was offered water instead of the treatment we deserve. He was given like the white privilege that all the other white people get. And it was crazy because Arbery, he didn't do anything, and he got shot like countless of times. And I just think that's like really crazy how like the two like don't add up at all. Like, there's no similarity to anything, and they just treat us like we're dogs or stuff.
So I hear coming from Cameron, a rising sophomore, something very similar than I hear coming from Earl, which is there's no justice it's not just. I can look at two situations, but it's not making sense to me. It's not, as Cameron said, adding up. I want to take a quick moment for you all to, if you're feeling comfortable, share with us, in the light of what has happened in the last few weeks, what were some of your, you may not be able to share some of your rawest emotions, but what were some of your raw emotions, thoughts, and feelings as you saw what happened unfold?
I mean, when I saw it, I told my wife, I said, it's like you're upset, but it's a chronic state of PTSD. We see it so much, and it gets played back over and over. There was a certain point where she hadn't seen it because she doesn't go on social media as much. So she was about to watch it, and I was just like, you got to go in another room. I mean, I've seen it too much, and it'll make me want to cry. But with me and my wife, and I say it all the time, part of me, there's an underlying, like I said, you want to cry, but you have to smile. There's an underlying anger, and it's about taming it, because I always say human nature is going to be human nature. You expect the majority to change their will for the minority, but why would they if they're in their minds already living their perfect world? Why would they change? So, you know, she's the ever optimist. I don't consider myself a critic or a cynic. I mean, I feel like I'm more of a realist. So we have this debate all the time. So when we see these things, we have very different ideas on it. But ultimately, I have to try to check myself, because I have to find that place in my heart to where I can still be a Christian. Because I'll say I have more Malcolm in me than Martin. And so it's trying to find that peace when I see those things. Especially, I don't know how everybody else, but where I work and how I choose to work in more rural areas, and for Tennessee, that's white. You know, most of the places I go, I'm the only black. There's no other African American, unless it's someone on the janitorial staff or in the kitchen. And so I go out of my way to make them feel like, they're just as important as I am. But, those people, what goes on in the world, they're just oblivious, or they choose to, it's apathy, really, So it's a constant state of having to live in that.
Anyone else?
My rawest emotion I cried when I saw it. And it came after a long day of being, of having to deal with being profiled. Yeah, I cried after. I think the thing that hit me the toughest was after they fired the cop and they didn't arrest him right then on the spot. And that just that speaks to the whole unjust part of our system. This man was allowed 4 days in which he could consult with attorneys, make up a plan, and then to see that the coroner came out and suggested that there was a heart attack and it had nothing to do with asphyxiation. I mean, it just shows how unjust this system is. So yeah, it's been tough for me to watch.
Yeah, I know for me personally, I was more so like Mr. David. I was upset, but overall I was trying to keep a smile on my face because I was just very desensitized. But I think when I found out with the case of Ahmaud Arbery when I found out that this had happened months before. And then months later, now it's big. Now it's a problem. Or now it's being publicized. That's when I was just very highly upset and just upset. Lack of better words.
Understood. David, you're a father, and you have 3 sons. The black family is under attack, especially when we're seeing these different situations going on. What are the conversations you're having in your home, especially with your boys?
Me and my boys, well, I should say with my oldest, we used to have the conversations a whole lot more. I would purposely, like even in Nashville, take him around to the ghettos, the hoods, and show him, and then revisit it later when gentrification was happening and explain all those things to him, and help him understand how sometimes it looks like it's a positive, but it can be a systemic form of racism to remove people. And then I would talk to him about how when me and his mother lived in Atlanta, how the same thing sort of happened. They removed the hood and put everybody out in Clayton County. Well, there's no bus system out there. They can't get back in. How are they going to get to their jobs? That sort of thing. It seems nice on the superficial side, but there's an underlying reason to everything. And then I try to tell them, but sometimes I feel like it's so much and it happens so often. Like, I don't want to overwhelm them. I don't want to steal their childhood from them. And then I feel like when you get older, there's times when you were a child, you would just ignore. But then I find myself, honestly, saying the same things to my kids. And my wife is now being more cognizant of it. We're out for a walk, and one of them may have on a hoodie and walk into a yard. Then all of a sudden, without even thinking about, boy, get back. because of where we are and who you are, and having to explain to them while they don't necessarily understand. Like I look at my oldest all the time. Me and Christian, we talk about, I want him to express himself. And I know I went through that stage when I was a kid. It's about having the high top fade, whatnot. It's different now. His hair looks wild to me. And I'm like, I want him to express it, but at the same time, I know he'll get judged. And what is that stigma that's going to be placed on him without ever meeting him? We talk about going into different situations and how you may have to be two different people at two different times. But then, like, I know from my family background, me and my wife, we have this conversation. My kids see me with a gun. They've watched me shoot. And I'm very much in my household like, when all of y'all hit a certain age, I expect every single person to be a licensed gun owner. And that doesn't mean that you got to go out there, because honestly, I used to carry a whole lot more than I do now. I would say I probably carried 80% of the time before, and it's much less now, but I've never had fear of my own people, even in the ghetto. Never had that fear, because it's just a way of how it works. And once you understand, I always felt comfortable. I don't carry because my wife was more concerned about me getting stopped by an officer and my life being taken that way. So for the longest time, I just left it at home. And I have been stopped plenty of times. I used to say it, my wife didn't understand, and then she saw it when I got in medical school. And that's why I tell people, it doesn't stop. Man, we got stopped so much while I was in med school and residency here because of the car I drove, or I had a van that was on 19s. Well, I would get stopped. Oh, there was a van that looked like yours. Man, there's no one with a 1983 Toyota Previa on 19s driving around Nashville. You know what I'm saying? But it was just always an excuse to pull me over. And then I would tell her, she'd be like, no. And then there was a couple times she got pulled over. And then once the window rolls down and they see the car seats in the back, when my twins were little, it was like, oh, I'm sorry, wrong car. Or we were pulling out of a driveway, and I'm right behind her. Officer swings in between us, pulls her over, and says, oh, I'm stopping you because a taillight is out. Now, I know what my car at that time looked like. Tinted on rims, HID lights. It was, but I knew it was a lie because I had just come from Nissan that day having it serviced. Everything on that car was perfect. So, the system isn't fair, and we get targeted all the time. And I have to explain those things to my kids without making it seem like they have to go through life being scared, and that there will be opportunities. It may not be the same opportunities, but then sometimes you got to make your own opportunity. I don't know, you could sit up at night and cry about it, and like I always tell them, sometimes I may seem like I'm hard on them, but it's my job to make them productive members of society, and I always say that, because I don't know what's going to happen when they walk out my door, but I do know I want them to be able to walk back in it. So it's an ever-changing conversation, but it's one that happens periodically.
I want you guys to take a moment and watch this video, and then we'll have your reaction.
And I ran my 2.23 miles, and I ran it with my mask on, right? Gotta have your mask on. Normally I only use the mask for about a half a mile, then I'll take it off and I can feel light and free and sort of go, but I felt like I needed to run the whole 2.23 with the mask. And it was hard. And then I took it off and I felt like I could breathe. But I feel like on a metaphorical level, I've been running with a mask for a really long time. There is this thing you have to do sometimes as a black man who tends to negotiate largely white circles, where you have to make sure that in order to be heard, you must first appease.
Thoughts?
It's true. I've had this conversation with my wife about at multiple different facilities I've been at where I'll have a medical director come at me with some problem. And it's always, oh, Dr. Chun, we need you to do this. And then once I say, oh, really? Well, and I start laying out facts, and which they can't refute, then all of a sudden it's, well, let's talk about this later, or let's move on. I'm like, no. You came to me in front of everybody else. I'm very comfortable where I'm at. Matter of fact, one guy, I told him, I said, I told you not to come to me at work. We can do this later. But since you chose to come, I'm not going to go somewhere else so you can change the narrative. You can talk to me in front of all these nurses right here, because I have no problem with it. And I've told my wife both times it's been 2 Caucasian males, but on both times, it's all of a sudden it goes from that they were very dominating and domineering. And I know I'm a tall guy, so I'm not standing up over them. And I'm sitting down both times. But once I voiced it, all of a sudden they try to play the, oh, he's an angry black man, and, oh, you know, calm down. And I'm perfectly calm, but you're not about to try to spin this, and we're not about to move to a different area so you can try to spin something else. And so when it's all said and done, I mean, I don't know, I guess maybe I look like the angry black male, but to everybody around, it's my position is known. And no matter what happens, it's, oh, well, Dr. Chun was correct in what he said and what he did. And I mean, so, but yeah, that's daily life.
I'm with you on that, brother.
Yeah, I just want to say that that's definitely true, and I feel like a lot of times we as black people have to code switch, change up who we are, how we talk, how we act, in order to appease white people. So
I'm with both of you on that. Fortunately for myself, I do not. I have my own environment, so I'm not the type to appease you. I'm going to be direct, you know. I'm going to be respectful, but I am going to let you know. And I understand your position, but I'm just that type, you know. I'm just going to shoot straight with you and keep it from there. So.
Well, I just want to thank you all for participating today. It was my honor to be able to facilitate this session. You know, I will say as a black female, you know, over the last few weeks, and really it's been years, it's just my heart is heavy because I don't know what you experience as a black male. I mean, I can see the evidence of it, but the internal, as David kind of alluded to, the double consciousness, as W.E.B. Du Bois talks about, that you have to live with every day, where I want to be me, I want to be strong, I want to be confident, I want to be who God made me, but then at the same time, you understand what effect that has and could potentially have on your life. So we thank you all for being voices today, for being willing to share your voices. And we pray God's blessing over your life, because we know that this is not an easy burden to carry. So thank you all.
If something goes wrong, your first line of defense, you know, the parents not being there, is to go to the police.
If you're Caucasian.
So, but I mean,
yeah,
still,
that's what you
still,
teach your children. Unfortunately,
you know.
it can't work for black children, right?
It doesn't mean that every police officer is inherently a bad person. But what it does mean is that the police force, that institution, does not look out for your best interests.
There's this unspoken code of racism and white supremacy that says that my life does not matter.
You can put your hands up and say, and cooperate, and say that I'm choking and still be killed, and then there's no repercussions.
It's maddening. I get so frustrated and angry about having to prepare my kids for something that they're not responsible for.
And these are conversations that people of other races do not have to have with their children.
their contributions to this conversation that is so critical at this very point in time. At this part of the program, we have our women up here with us to offer their thoughts and their reflections. We have Meredith McCraw that is here with us. We have Pastor Kim Mann, who is here with us. We have Aunt Donna Harrison with us. And we have Tarika Mixon with us. And I just want to jump right into our conversation, if you will. And I would like to just start off with Aunt Donna, ask you a question first. And so in the midst of all of this, you have a son, Brenton, which we love and admire. You also have a grandson. What resonates with you as you hear parents discussing how they talk to their children about police interactions, about being black in America?
Well, testing. What resonates with me is that, first of all, like you said, I have a 2-year-old grandson and I have a son who is in his 30s. It was supposed to be better by now. You know, it feels like we have just regressed. We've just been on the slippery slope and now we're just sliding down, and it just was supposed to be better for my 2-year-old. I remember having conversations with my son when he was about to drive, and then when he was driving, and went shopping and had a security guard following him. And my husband and I were in a debate because he was saying, my son got out of the car and asked why he was being followed, you know, and demanded, you know, you tell me why you're following me. And my husband was supporting him in that, and I said, he said, you know, I'm trying to teach him to be a man, and I'm saying, but I want him to be alive to become an adult man.
Wow.
And, you know, and now, you know, all these years later, I'm having a conversation with my husband as we push my 2-year-old through our neighborhood in a stroller. And he says, this is the same husband who said, I'm trying to teach him how to be a man. He looks at his 2-year-old grandson and says, everybody's stopping, everybody's speaking to the baby. He's so cute now, he's 2 years old. But, you know, in a few years, he'll be a threat to them, you know, and it just was supposed to be better.
Wow, thank you for that. And just hearing that is it's discouraging, in a sense, to hear, and it's heartbreaking. I can only imagine that's the feeling that you may have, and the others of you who may be parents with sons, right? Both Pastor Mann, Meredith, you have children, young men, sons, and so it's disheartening to hear that. So just thank you for just sharing that and those reflections. And so just to kind of transition a little bit, Tarika, I have a question for you. So being a young adult, you know, in your 20s, and you're exploring the world, you're doing what you do, racism, it's real. And it's not just real, but it's also systemic. And based upon what we're witnessing in these last few weeks, what are some of the conversations that you and your peers are having right now?
I was kind of reflecting on this earlier this week while I was talking to some of my friends, and even last night we were in a conversation well until midnight about this. And the same as this topic, we're tired. Mentally, spiritually, emotionally, we're tired. And just kind of a few things that we're saying, like, we're tired of a system that's not designed for us. We're tired of a system that will never, it seems like, cater to us. We're tired of having to wake up every day or every other day with a different name as a hashtag, with a different news story, with a different opinion, with a, you know, just something every day. We're so tired of it. One of the bigger things that's kind of surfacing that we're tired of is we're now starting to draw lines in the sand. They've been drawn, and we're starting to just accept it for what it is. And a lot of things for us is the social media. We're looking, one of my friends that I was talking to, she said it perfectly. A lot of the people that we went to undergrad with that, you know, asked us to sing on praise teams in school and asked us, like, hey, can you play this sport with me? Can you be on my football team? Can you be on my basketball team? Can you be on my track team? You wanted us and you loved us then, but now when all of these things are happening to us, you're not saying anything. You wanted our friendship and you wanted all of this camaraderie, and you wanted us to be a community in undergrad and graduate school and everything else. But now that another person in our community has been killed, especially unjustly, you have nothing to say. And so we're tired of having to wait for you to kind of placate us or wait for you to ask us a question or wait, we're tired of having to explain it to you because this isn't the first time, this isn't the 10th time, this isn't the 100th time. We're tired of it, and at this point, it's kind of like you have all the tools and resources to educate yourself. We're tired of you having to try to come to us so that we can make you feel better. We're not doing that anymore. So now the lines in the sand have been drawn. If you're not actively speaking out or letting your opinions known, whether you're for our community or against our community, if you're not saying anything, your silence speaks louder than sometimes your words. Sometimes your silence is deafening. And so if you're not for us, even if you're not speaking, then you're against us. And if you're against us, you're not a part of my community. And so I don't want you to continue to laugh at my posts. I don't want you to continue to comment in agreement when I post a funny meme or if I do a PSA or something on Facebook, when I rant about something that you may personally immediately identify with, but you're silent when I'm posting about something that's affecting my community. I'm not going to wait for you to decide that you want to respond or you want to say something. A lot of people have been unfriended, a lot of conversations and things have been broken because we're tired of it. So we're kind of getting to that point where, a lot of people are saying Google is free. You can find the information that you want. There's a wealth of information. Even in this current pandemic, the library offers free audiobooks. If you want to read up about something or you want to have more information, you can. You just don't want to. And if you don't want to, okay. But please don't come to me asking me to sing for you or asking me to do something because you like that side of my community, but you don't like the other side of my community. Also, stop telling us how to grieve. Stop telling us how to feel, because for a lot of us, we have to internalize this, and we have to realize, maybe when I was 10 or 11, it was, okay, you're having the conversation with your parents of, if something happens and you're in the car with somebody, make sure your hands are seen. Make sure you're saying, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. But now the conversation, and it's like, okay, this may happen to my dad, this may happen to someone in another state, but now the conversation has had to evolve. You can do everything right. You can get pulled over having done nothing wrong and still end up dead. You can be walking in the park, minding your own business. You can be going to the store to buy candy. You can be talking on your phone. You can literally be doing anything and your life is over. And so it's not just, hey, if you do this, then you'll be safe. It's even in spite of if you do these things. I have to tell my 10-year-old nephew, when we're walking around in our neighborhood, even if we're doing everything right, it could still end up so very wrong. And then it's not just, it could be my dad, it could be, somebody else, it could be me. It could be the person that I'm sitting next to at church. This is now becoming so close to home, and we have to live with that reality that today or yesterday my dad was mowing my lawn, and this afternoon something could happen to him. And that's a reality that you have to live with, and that's a reality that you have to feel and you have to process. So you can't tell me that when George Floyd is sitting there as a grown man laying on the ground crying for his mother that I can't feel that. You can't tell me that when you have 3 officers subduing one man who is now, he's not resisting, and you have another officer who's blatantly ignoring these cries, you can't tell me that I can't feel some type of way about that. And you also can't tell me how I choose to be mean or how I choose to be mad. You can't tell me that, oh, this rioting is wrong and you guys shouldn't take it that far. I'm not going to put my grief in a box that fits what your ideal of grief is. That's not how this is going to work. You can't, I'm not going to listen to how you tell me to grieve. And then lastly, we're having the conversation about mental health. There's always the conversation of we must be able to join in this fight and we have to be able to be a part of the change. But someone was saying it better, like we have to make sure we take care of ourselves because we can't continuously take care and give of our own cup, and then when we're empty, we have nothing to give ourselves. So the conversation is also, hey, how are you doing? How are you coping with this? Not necessarily, we don't want to become numb to it, but we also don't want to become an overload because there is social media and you can see several different scopes of the videos and everything else. So how are you learning how to cope and how to process with your own things? Like, hey, we now, because of this pandemic, can't all just get together like we used to and talk about our feelings. But are you talking to your friends? Are you talking to your family? Are you talking to a therapist? What are the things that you're doing to sometimes laugh in spite of this? Because if you don't, especially in this current moment of isolation, you will go insane faster than normal. Because in addition to this, you also have your work life. Your job is still expecting you to show up and do what you're supposed to do. Your family's still expecting you to put food on the table and still communicate. And then you're expected to still live your personal life. So we have to make sure that all of those things are being mindful. And then the last thing I'll share is actually one of our dear pastors, Pastor Elisa Jones, said it in the best way, and we ended kind of our conversation last night with this of you would never tell someone who's being abused by their significant other that it's okay. Maybe it's a different option, you know. Maybe let's see what he thinks and what's going on in his mind to cause him or her to hit you or to bash your head in or talk about you this way. You wouldn't, and you definitely wouldn't tell them to go back to them. So why would you tell my community who's being abused by all of these other people and all of these other races, why would you tell us to go back to them and put our faith in them and to put our trust in them? It just doesn't make sense.
Wow, thank you. You know, you talked about the conversations you're having are centered around this ideal of separating and maybe even severing, distancing yourself from the relationships that you had with people who are being silent on this topic. You talked about the grieving nature of hey, you're grieving, and let you grieve how you grieve. And then the ideal of mental health, right, and taking care of yourself. And I wonder to any of the other panelists, are these consistent with the conversations you're having? Or what else is what other conversations are you having around this time?
Well, one of the things that we're doing from the conference office is we have like a little Friday night chat where we can just kind of talk. And last night, our topic of conversation was riots, retaliation, and religion. And what part does our spirituality play in how we cope and what does that look like? And one of the things that I found is like, we just need space to be angry and to process and to not be rushed through that process. Like, it's okay to say I'm mad or I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm frustrated and not have those emotions covered up or pacified by religion, by, well, we need to forgive 70 times 7 and we need to pray without ceasing and we need to pray for our enemies. There's a place and a time for that, but when we push that too early in the process, then it creates resentment. And now I don't want to deal with your God because your God doesn't care about my community's pain. Your God doesn't care about what's going on. And so, you know, just a lot of what what I was talking about with my young people are like, are you having these conversations with your friends? Like your classmates, your friends that you went to academy with, are they having these conversations? Are you having the conversations with them? And what does that look like? And we are like how we have to have the conversation with our kids, but our kids are having to have the conversation with their friends. And we're having to equip them to be able to have those conversations in an informed way, because if not, those friends become their parents and then have another generation of kids who are just like them. So, you know, I would say that the cops we see now are the children of the racists from the 60s who didn't have the conversations and didn't choose to change. So I think that's something that's super important. And then the other thing that I've been seeing a lot of is we have to stop having conversations just to have conversations. Like, let's get like some Caucasians and some Black people and some Asians together, and let's dialogue about race. And we're doing it for the sake of looking diverse, but not for the actual purpose of creating change and dialogue. That's a conversation. That's not perpetuating change, because everybody's showing up at the table with their feelings already intact. I'm showing up to try to convince you that I'm already right. I'm not showing up with the idea that I'm here to listen. And so I think our young people especially are over these race conversations where we're going to talk about how we feel, because they're like, you ain't going to listen. You showed up because you wanted to put my Black face on a flyer. Like, that's why I'm here. I'm not here because you actually care about putting policies in place at my university or at my academy or wherever, so that way I can feel included. So that's what I've been getting from a lot of our young people and what we've been talking about, you know, on our end.
One of the things that we're talking about at my school is changing some of the things that we talk about. Like, for instance, a phrase that we say a lot of times is generational trauma. Okay, well, the trauma is real today. So on our college campuses, we wonder why the college going rate for African American males is lagging behind everyone, and why they're not going, and if they go, why they aren't persisting, and if they persist, why they don't graduate at the same rates that every other minority group, and then of course compared to whites also. Well, one of the reasons is because a white male student, when he walks across the campus, goes into his classroom safe and sound, no problem. Where a Black male student, when he walks around the campus, somebody may call him the N-word on his way. And then he gets to his economics class and he can't concentrate. And so he does not have the same experience. That's not generational. That happened to him 15 minutes ago. So we have to start talking about what is happening live to our children right now, not what happened to my dad and then what happened to me, because there were some changes that got better, and my kids can go to places that we could not go. But there still are things that are keeping them from being successful because they don't have the experience that a white person does. They don't have that same safety. So that's not generational. They have experienced every day some of the same things that we experience and that our parents experience, is just quiet and it's in a corner. So my son decided he wanted to not put his hand on his heart and stand up when you do the Pledge of Allegiance. He got a lot of backlash at his school of 2,000 students where they have less than 2% African American. And the only reason that it didn't escalate was because his social studies teacher got in the middle of it and was like, this is his way. He doesn't have to. We don't have to do that. But what if she hadn't been there, and what if she wasn't the person that she was? That happened to him in his class. So if he's if that's what happens when he does that, what happens 10 minutes later when he's writing his paper or reading his book? That's not generational, that's now. So some of the things we need to put down, that we carry those things. Our kids don't have, my son doesn't have a connection to what my father went through in the 60s. He has his own experiences. Those are now. And we have to start recognizing how that affects our kids when they go all the places that they go, because their experience is very different than some white guy who is walking down the street.
Thank you for that, Meredith. That was powerful. And I want to just kind of dive in a little bit more in regards to your son. You said your son is at school. He he decides to not put his hand over his heart during the national anthem, and that was his right. But he got caught a lot of backlash, but his social studies teacher got in the way of that. So what conversations are you having with not just one son, but all three of your sons, the conversations you and your husband are happening, because there's not always going to be someone that gets in the way. So if and when your son gets pulled over by the police, what conversations are you having with him, you and your husband, with your sons?
Okay, so first, just the background. We live in a weird kind of rural suburban area just outside of Nashville. We live in Spring Hill, which is just far enough not to be considered suburban, definitely not urban, but it still has a suburban feel, but it's rural enough that we still have people who are farmers and so forth that our kids go to school with. So there's that mix, and the further you get out of an urban area, the more racism is in your face than not. I mean, for years in our own neighborhood, my husband was getting pulled over all the time until he actually went to court and made a complaint and told the judge what was happening, and the judge was like, if it happens again, call me. And that was 10 years ago, and it stopped, but it was every week. So I expected a bit. I mean, it's sad that you have to expect that you're going to encounter some type of racism. I just never thought it was going to be physical. So I expected someone's going to call me a name, or somebody's going to say something about my child, or somebody's going to try to keep something away from my kids at school that they should have. But I never thought it was going to be physical. When we really started talking to the boys about how to deal with the police or how to deal with neighbors, Dylan was a teenager, and he was running cross country. And it's hot in Tennessee in the summer. He doesn't want to run in the daytime. He wants to run at night. And they were putting down 50 miles a week. So, you know, he's running a long time every time he gets out on the road. And he was probably about 15 when Trayvon Martin was killed. So that was 2013-ish. President Obama had already been the president. We had cheered, and, you know, oh, this country's going to change, and oh, this is going to be fantastic. And then Trayvon got murdered. Well, I panicked. Like, it caused me anxiety for Dylan to actually be out on the road running every night. And he's not jogging. He's running 7-8 miles an hour, you know. He's running. And so a black dude running in the middle of the night could cause white people all kind of fear. Well, I hadn't even thought about it like that until Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I remember having to sit down, and I told Dylan at first, I said, I'm sorry, look, you cannot run at night. You just can't do it. And if you're going to run in the day, I'm going to be somewhere close behind you, because if there's a situation, I want to be close by. Of course, he thought I was crazy, and I was, but I was afraid. So I decided, you know what, forget it. He can run whenever he wants to. But I went to all of my neighbors, and I said, listen, Dylan runs at night. We restricted him a certain area, and I went to all of my neighbors, and I said, hey, Dylan runs at night. I just want to let you guys know that it'll be 9 o'clock at night, and he's going to be out there running. And one of my neighbors, who I didn't know, was like, why are you telling me this? And I said, because I don't want my son murdered. Because Trayvon Martin was in his own, well, it was his stepmother's neighborhood or whatever, in this nice neighborhood. And we live in a nice neighborhood. I don't want anything to happen to my son. And it was, I mean, we had to have those conversations with him. And of course, kids think that they are invincible, and it didn't matter to him. He never thought that anything could happen to him. So even after Trayvon Martin's murder, and we had those conversations about how to talk to the police and how to do these things and what you need to do and all of that, you know, I'm shaking right now just thinking about it. It just panics me. And then we ended up having to have the conversation again and again and again. And finally, I had to tell Brian, I'm not having this conversation anymore, because I don't want them to live in a panicked sense all of the time. I don't want them to be afraid. I want them to be able to go and hang out with their friends and not have all that stuff behind them making them worry. I'll worry, I'll follow them on find my own iPad. I follow them everywhere because I'm afraid. Because if they are somewhere that could be sketchy, Aaron had to do some of the stuff I don't even understand what they do. He's a flag runner or something. They had a meeting in Fairview, which is pervasively racist, at night. And when his phone stopped pinging, like, you know how it says last time was 15 minutes ago, I packed up my car and I was ready to go. And Brian was like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "I'm about to go to Fairview," because I haven't heard from Aaron in over an hour. His phone is not pinging anymore. And he said, "Well, why don't you just call one of his friends' moms and see," because none of them were getting cell phone service, "and find out if anybody had talked to them." And I did. Well, you know what? None of my girlfriends were worried about their kids. None of them. They were like, "No, they're fine. They're at such and such." And I was like, no, I'm like really afraid that my son is in Fairview at night and I haven't heard from him in an hour. Those are things that they don't have to deal with. And so that's, again, like I said before, that's not generational. And it is terrible that we have to have these conversations with our children, because then we then put onto them, which is a mental health issue like Tariq was talking about, an extra layer of your fear onto them. Because some of those things they just don't understand because they are 16 or 17 or whatever. So I don't think it matters that I live out in a semi-rural community. I think racism is real everywhere that you go. I don't think it's any worse where I am than where it is in an urban area. I just think it's wildly unfair, and in an area that says that we are Christians, it doesn't even make any sense.
Wow, thank you for that. And as we're kind of wrapping up this portion, this section, I just want you to just think about, as you think about what's been happening these last few weeks, and in reality, the last centuries, how do you feel, in one word, how do you feel when you see your husband, your brother, your son, your friend, males that go out into society? Like, what comes to mind? If there's a one word that you can just say that describes what goes through your mind, if you can even capture it in one word, what would that be?
I don't know that there's one word, but right now I feel sad.
Thank you.
I'm afraid for them. I'm afraid. And it's just really scary to think that we send them off and they may not come back. That's a fear. And I'm afraid for them. And of course, you don't want to put that on your children. Right. And so I hope they're not watching this. But I don't want them to be upset, and I don't want them to see me upset, but I am afraid.
I would say anxiety, just because I worry about not just them coming home. I worry about, are they prepared to go out? I have a 15-year-old, I have a 3-year-old, and I have a husband. And so I worry about the mental load that this weighs on them. Like, I'm scared that you might not come back, but I'm also scared of the psychological factors that you have to deal with on an everyday basis of being an African American male, and how are you carrying that? Because I can't carry that for you, and are you carrying it okay? So just anxiety. My son went out with some friends, and he was supposed to text me when he got there and text me when he got back. But he didn't text me when he got there because there was no service. So then there's that anxiety of, is he okay? What happened? Did something happen? Is he... And it's no longer like the fear of he got in a car accident, because those are normal parent fears. It's, did he get pulled over? Did something bad happen to him? So I would say just anxiety.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I'd say worried. For me, I have my brother. He's 21 now, and you know, I think even though our age difference isn't that much, you know, I think of him like, you need to tell me where you're going. you know. But it's just like, for the most part, he's in the house, but then, you know, he'll go somewhere, and I'm worried for him. But I'm not just worried for him, you know. I'm worried for my best girlfriend in Florida. She works as a nurse at night. And who's to say that while she's getting into her car and, you know, she works for one of the hospitals in a really good part of town, who's to say that somebody's not going to stop her wearing scrubs and a badge and question her about her whereabouts and what she's doing out that late? I worry about myself. If I go running or walking in the park, who's to say somebody's not going to stop me? I got into a car accident a couple months ago, and my first thought was, the cops are going to come. This accident's not my fault, but I already know that it's not going to be fair. So my first thought was, I have to call so-and-so, and I have to do this, and I have to make sure everyone knows, hey, this is what's happening. So if you don't hear from me or I don't hear from you, you know, I'm worried. And it's sad that we have to do and make precautions like that. So, yeah.
Anxiety. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, your reflections. Now we're going to move to the third segment of our discussion, to where we'll hear a little bit from our pastoral staff on how the church is to be responding in this moment.
I think one way, I think there are many ways, I think there are a lot of ways, but one in particular I would think is having a community and a body that is not silent about even the different subtle racist ways or biases that people can hold. What I mean by that is, I think sometimes people can say things flippantly or just make little snarky remarks, whether it's about a different race or someone in a different sociological position than they might be, and people just let it slide, or it's just, oh, that's just them, or that's just the culture they came from, or that's just how they grew up, or that's the things that their mothers used to say. But I think as a body and as a community, I think it's those little seeds that really work to harden our heart towards how we see people made in the image of God. And so I think one way that communities can work towards uprooting these kinds of things is simply calling sin sin and calling it out when you see it, gently, lovingly, with discernment. But I think we have to talk about those little things before we even get to the big ones. And so having a community that is honest, having a community that is confronting, having a community that is free to exhort and convict when needed and necessary, but also having an ear that is discerning to actually hear it in the conversations. And so being attentive, but not in a judgmental, self-righteous way, but I want Black people, I want white people, I want Hispanic, I want Asian. When they come into our body, I want them to feel safe, and I want them to know that they are welcome, and I want them to know that God loves them and loves us, and that He has made us all in His image and for His glory. And so, yeah, a community that is honest and willing to have those hard conversations and correct and confront sin when necessary.
Greg Fontes, Minister Eric Holness, Pastor Furman Foreman, and Minister Damaris Miller. I'm going to read a tweet from you from the President of the United States. These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with them all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you. Take about 30 seconds or less and respond. Greg?
Part of me doesn't want to respond to the ignorance. All I will say is that is the reason for us to take up our right to vote, because we have ignorance that is in leadership. We have racism that is in leadership, and it's completely unacceptable. And so I'll just leave it at that.
I think there's so many problems. First of all, being classified as thugs when in other events, whether it's talking about folks rising up in other states like Michigan, they're good people, or Charlottesville, good people, but my people are not people, they're thugs. And so you're already criminalizing or marketing them in such a way in which it's almost acceptable to then condone that concluding statement to start shooting. And so, I mean, it's problematic from the top to the bottom, but we're people.
People tell you who they are, believe them.
For me, I think it's such a bold statement where he is blatantly saying, you loot, we will shoot, giving the cops, the military, the command to kill.
Thank you. Platforms matter. People who are on platforms, their voices matter and they carry. In this segment, your voices matter as leaders in our church, pastoral leaders, spiritual leaders in our church. It matters. And the things that we say, convey, speak about, and choose not to speak about carry. And so I'm now wanting to shift us towards the platforms that we have, right? And what we're doing with that. Pastor Fordham, I'm going to ask you to start us off. There's a concern, especially among millennials, and I would expand it beyond that, but we're seeing a large number of people in that late 20s, early 40s almost, leaving our church. And some of the main things they talk about is that our church is silent on different issues. And when I say our church, I'm not just talking about Riverside. I mean, it's inclusive of potentially, but Riverside, the larger SDA church, Christianity, I mean, we can take it from whichever level. So what are your thoughts regarding our stance or what our voice on racism in the church?
Yeah, I hope I have more than 30 seconds on this one, right?
Yes.
I appreciate that. I'm going to try to respond as if we're talking about the corporate Adventist church.
Yeah, okay.
My understanding is that our General Conference President, Ted Wilson, put out a tweet yesterday evening and said, "Happy Sabbath." And I think one of the best responses was, "Sir, read the room." I want to respond by juxtaposing your previous statement. Donald Trump is the president of the United States, but everything he says does not represent true America, And in the same way, everything that Ted Wilson says or doesn't say doesn't represent true Adventism. Early Adventism was extremely socially conscious. You could think about individuals like Joseph Bates was an abolitionist who helped to found an anti-slavery organization. The dude, A.T. Jones of 1888 Righteousness by Faith fame, he testified before a U.S. congressional subcommittee on the subject of separation of church and state. I mean, these dudes, Ellen White was invited by the Temperance Society to be a keynote speaker, Something happened, though, like it happens to most organizations. In the 20s, 30s, 40s, this, I'm going to say, fundamental Adventism crept up that became a little less society and social justice oriented and a little more internalistic with their views of righteousness, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to suggest that when I preach today with the I Can't Breathe shirt, I'm more Adventist than the individuals who are ignoring so-and-so. And I want to suggest that in a body, you need various parts and members to support areas where we may be weak and where we may not be speaking out in the way that we should. I think African American Adventists, millennials especially, have not only an opportunity, a role and a responsibility to say, yo, this is Adventism too. I mean, stand up and say that thing. I'm just as Adventist as Ted Wilson. Yeah. I got a baptismal certificate too. And I want to suggest that I'm standing in the prophetic tradition of Isaiah, Amos, and all these brothers. So I don't, just because Donald Trump says XYZ, I'm not throwing in I'm American. That's right. I'm not throwing in that my card. I'm going to challenge you and say what you said is not American. Well, I'm also not going to throw in my Adventist card. Man, I believe Jesus is coming again. I believe that we are saved by grace through faith. I believe that those that die do not have immortality, but that they will receive it. And I believe that Jesus is our intercessor in the heavenly sanctuary. I believe that the law is to be kept because it's a reflection of the character of God. And that's why I'm Adventist. Yeah. And I also believe that we should continue to minister to the least of these like Jesus did. I can hold all of those together and continue to be Adventist. Sorry, that went past the 30 seconds.
That was excellent.
Praise the Lord.
I appreciate your thoughts. Others, what do we say about, what are your thoughts on what seems to be the silence of the church, the turning away?
It's disheartening to see the silence, right? These are people that you sit in the pews with. These are people who lift up the same hymns as you, understand the same doctrine as you, were baptized just like you. And for you to be struggling and experiencing these treacherous happenings, and for you to be silent, that lets me know it puts me in a place where I ask the question, who is really my brother? Who is really my brother's keeper, right? We talk about that often, but if you were truly my brother's keeper, you would understand that my arms are hurting. I need someone to lift me up right now, but you don't want to do that. And so you're silent about that. And so that's angry, that's frustrating, that makes many of us want to walk away. But the beautiful thing, what I like what you said, Pastor, was how we can hold all of these things together. I believe that to be true. Right? I can love something so much. That's why I critique it. That's why I critique the Adventist church. Not because I don't want to be a part of it. I want it to be better. We have a standard. If we believe ourselves to be this last day church with this prophetic understanding, with all of these truths that we claim, then let's critique how we act. Let's critique and let's uphold ourselves to this law of love. The greatest commandment, love God, love others. So let's do that. Right? Yeah, I'm not here. Yes, I understand your theology and I embrace it, but I also have to live in the moment. So I'm going to hold you accountable to that. And that's just my thoughts about it.
I think for me, I'm realizing that there's two sides to the silence. There's the side of the silence that I really don't care. It's not my issue. That's your thing. I got my Jesus over here. You got your Jesus over there. There's the side of, I don't care because, it just doesn't affect me. Then there's the other silence where I had a friend of mine, white female pastor, contact me this week with tears saying, I've realized that I'm privileged. And I realized that I've been silent. But the reason why I've been silent is because I don't know what to say. I don't know how to stand for you. And she literally said to me, teach me how to stand for you. And we had a great conversation after that. And so I'm learning that there's two sides of that thing because it's horrific. And I don't know about you all, if you ever dealt with somebody who's had a death in their family that was unexpected, you don't know what to say. Like, you don't know. I can't say I've been there. I know what you're talking about. I can't say I'm praying for you. It's cliche. I can't say, I just don't know what to say. So sometimes there's a silence that takes place because I just don't know. But what I respect about Chelsea, and I'm going to name her, is that she said, I've been silent, not because I don't love you. It's because I don't know what to say. So teach me what to say. Teach me how to stand. And because of that conversation this week, I am, through the grace of God, trying to now engage in conversations with my white counterparts, with my friends of different races, not just white, and trying to ignite a conversation just to see if they're silent because they just don't know, or they're silent because they just don't care.
I think we've come to a place where it's easy to forget some of the rich parts of the history, like Pastor Fordham mentioned. 157 years this organization has been in existence, and there's a dwindling minority of some of those standing up for the right though the heavens may fall moments. But I think in line even with what Greg said was that that love actually demands a sense of accountability. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a worldwide organization. Every general conference I go, and I enjoy the parade of the different nations. And you think of how the church has had spheres of influence in different places, but also how the church's silence is not just an American thing, and it's not just a recent thing. I'm only 25 going on 26, but you can look back and see silence surrounding the Holocaust, silence surrounding apartheid in South Africa, the crises in Rwanda, and then, of course, just different systemic issues here stateside during the civil rights movement. And I'm grateful for certain SDA pastors that did what was uncomfortable and unconventional. But I think it is that love that demands an accountability for the ways which we have been silent, and demands, I'll say it this way, I love hearing about the three angels' messages, but before there was a first angel's message, second angel's message, the third angel's message, there was 7 churches, and they always end, this is what the Spirit is saying to the church. And I just refuse to believe that the Spirit is done speaking to the church. And so maybe this is a time for us to take in silence and seek God, because further silence beyond this is problematic and unacceptable, and the silence is deafening, and it speaks volumes, and it is costing my brothers, my sisters in this country and across the globe their lives.
If I may, I just want to add a little something, and I'm agreeing with what's being said, but like Damaris, I want to affirm those who have spoken. Man, I received, I don't know if it's the same Chelsea, but I received a text from one of our Nashville colleagues, pastoral colleagues in our Imagine Nashville group, and she just put on the thread, man, I'm hurting with you all, And then one of my good friends, Ken Wetmore, he called, he said, man, like you said, man, I don't know what to say, but I want you to know, man, I love you, And I think your illustration is perfect. For those that don't know, it is like bereavement. You may not have lost your mother, but you care for your friend. And you just let them know, look, I notice and I care. I see you. I think that's what you can do. I also want to affirm our North American division. Our North American division put out a statement, and I thought it was well written. I don't want people to think you've got to speak like that. That's great. But you can just say, man, I saw this thing. How you doing? And I think we should affirm when our organization does do that. One other little minor note, and I don't want to be misunderstood here. We should remember that our General Conference president is president over Adventists in 270-something countries. So sometimes we can expect that every time something happens in the United States that he should be able to respond to it. Well, that's more so the North American division's jurisdiction. But I also want to make sure he's aware his headquarters is here. Yeah. So there's a little, and because of some perceptions, it might be helpful to get an assistant to make sure that we speak to this issue, because the silence is becoming problematic.
Well taken. So some things that you guys have mentioned, and even in my own circles, I went to a predominantly white Seventh-day Adventist academy. I've been to many predominantly white churches, black churches, a variety of personal Seventh-day Adventist experience having grown up in the church. And, I'm sure you guys may be seeing it as well, where some people, you're so encouraged, like your voice, you are speaking, like you are saying something on our behalf, and then you see silence. But I'm thinking about the institution in that, what are your thoughts as it relates to individual messages, right, that say, this is how I feel, right? But if we kind of go back a step from our previous question, when individuals have platforms, but the messaging of affiliation stays at the individual level and doesn't move into the platform level that they have. Like, how do you think it's a discomfort? And I know you can't speak for people because you don't know, but I think sometimes I'm starting to see individually, I'm willing to say something on behalf or in solitude or solidarity, but I still haven't maybe seen that move towards the platform that they have. Is the question making sense?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you. I do believe that sometimes as leaders, we might not quickly recognize that we have more influence and more of a voice because of our platform than we realize. And we may not know that there's an expectation for us to speak from that platform, you know. I also think that recent history suggests that our predominantly Caucasian Adventist church may not recognize that this is an expectation. Now, you take the Black African American church, dude, this is an expectation. It's expected that as the pastor of Riverside, I'm going to the march at 3 o'clock today. You know, where was your pastor? You know, that's what Black. And I think that we need, once again, to help our Adventist church as a whole, well, to help the Caucasian side of our Adventist church. The power structure, because as a whole, we're colored. But the power structure, I think, to see that it's not just expected that we have a statement on same-sex marriage. It's not just expected that we have a statement on abortion, things that are a little more theological relative to individual actions, but that we and our communities expect statements on things that are happening in the social justice arena. I think we need to educate on that. And I don't think that it's lost that, you know, there's an African American who's the executive secretary of the North American Division, and they had a great statement. You know, there is not an African American that is in the presidential, cabinet right now. I think we have our female vice president, praise the Lord, but we don't have president, secretary, treasurer African American. You know, I think there's a loss of a voice there, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to shift us to our next question, which is, what is the church's role in racial reconciliation?
I'll kick it off really brief. In my personal opinion, I think the church's role is to have a balance. When I think about Jesus, when I think about the Bible, I'm reminded that there's a time and place for everything. Jesus loved, Jesus healed, Jesus was caring, Jesus wept. But also there was a Jesus in the sanctuary that was tearing things up because of the injustice. And I think there's a healthy balance that takes place. And I'm not suggesting tearing things up, but I am suggesting to stand firmly. That wasn't the meek Jesus. That was the brolic Jesus. That wasn't the passive Jesus. That was like, no, right now, right here, this ain't happening. And so I believe as a church, our stance should have a healthy balance where we're loving, where we're weeping, but we're also standing firm.
I agree. I think I find two principles that may apply in this situation. And what I learned as a child when I did something wrong, own up to it, and find ways to make amends. You know, you punch your peer, you apologize, face some consequences, you make amends. And I think the church is out of love, able to hold itself accountable and be like, these are the ways we have not spoken up. We have not been silent. And I think the other principle is guided by my travels, which I miss very much. If you see something, say something. Right now, we are the body of Christ, but there are parts of our body that are hurting. There are parts of our body that cannot breathe. And so just like you have a toothache and you're going to go handle that, there are parts of this body, this is Christ's body, that need to be tended to. And so I think taking that accountability, seeing that something is wrong, spurs us from meaningful conversation into tangible action.
Yeah, I want to respond by kind of highlighting the purpose of what the Black church was conceived to do to answer this. Because when you think about the Black church from its conception in slavery, right? The Black church was brought about as a means of reclaiming Black identity, right? It was a means of affirming the Black individual. It was a means of lifting up their responsibility, of reclaiming their identity as the image of God. That's what the Black church was designed to do, as Pastor Fortimer alluded to. Yo, if this is the Black church, there's an expectation you're saying that. When it comes to the church at large, that's what the churches should be doing, right? Because the Black church was conceived to do what other denominations and churches were not doing. So the church at large needs to get to the place where it reclaims Black identity as part of the image of God, right? Because when you talk about reconciliation from its root word, it means to kind of bring back again, right? At some point there was a unification, then there was a breakage, and reconciliation is to repair that, right? So when we were Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, God can see this entire humanity, white, black, yellow, green, all colors as one. Sin, racism, original sin, broke that, right? The church's responsibility is to bring us back to that. It's to bring us back to the image of God, where we are reclaiming Black identity as the image of God. So that means structurally, that means our system, that means our politicking, that means how we greet people, that means who's in the spaces, that means who's speaking, that means who's acknowledging, that means all of that, right? If that's what the Black church is about, the church at large needs to adopt that same mentality.
I want to add the concept of balance. I think the church's role is to cast a vision, to be the moral compass, but to also balance some of the extremes that happen. You know, history is like this pendulum that just action and reaction. And, you know, we've had in the Black community organizations or movements that I would characterize as being extreme, you know. No, all white people are not the devil. They're just not, you know. All Black people ain't the devil, you know. And I think that we need the church to say, okay, yes, Black people were made in the image of God. No, you are not going to now engage in reverse discrimination, you know. I think that we need to be the place where we show the community of God. You know, I'm glad that Riverside has individuals worshiping with us, a part of our family who are not African American. And I think it's healthy for us to make sure that as we affirm our community and speak to our issues, that we don't disrespect, you know, that's wrong. We need to be held accountable for that. But it's also important that we not think that we shouldn't speak. You know, I think our job is to be that balancing moral compass that says, you know, Jesus said it, by this all men will know you're my disciples when you have love one for another. We should be the place where racial harmony exists, which opens up a whole nother conversation about our corporate church. But anyway, go ahead.
Absolutely. We're not going to go there today, but I want to thank you all for being a part of this panel, because I think our audience needs to hear the fact that, and you've kind of alluded to it, we know, I mean, we're not blind to the fact that our church does not have what you just described, the place where racial harmony happens. I mean, we are very divided. Doesn't mean it's not possible, and doesn't mean it doesn't have it in pockets. But as a whole, we are just not there yet. But as you guys spoke about throughout this whole segment, we can't give up on what we have. And we have to take ownership individually, every person, to say, what can we do in order to help people understand and know that this message that we're preaching, this three angels message, this second advent, Jesus is coming again message, is a message that needs to be expressed through love. But what does love look like? And love looks like understanding that we are all valuable, we all matter, and when one hurts, the other should be hurting as well, and trying to figure out how we can move forward from there. And so if we really want this great gospel commission to go forward, and that Jesus' soon return is going to come, it's going to come regardless, but if we want to hasten his coming, it is not just about tracts that talk about Jesus died on the cross, but it's what are we living and what are we showing as representation of the man that came to this earth to show the true example of what love is. Are we doing that? And that is what I believe our challenge is to our greater community, church community. And what my challenge is to those of you who are, considering or have left the church is that we still have a work to do. And it takes all of us in order to get that work done. Again, thank you all for being here with us. And we appreciate your voice in this space because it truly does matter. Thank you.
Amen. Let me also take this time to thank you. We appreciate the organizing of this summer with our next steps, as well as we had some other ministries that have joined in, Impact the City. We always appreciate our worship team for helping to facilitate things. There is a citywide I Will Breathe rally that is taking place today right at 3 o'clock. The spot is Legislative Plaza downtown, gathering at 625 Rosa Parks, and then heading to Legislative Plaza. And we are encouraging our church to be represented. This is an example of a very active way in which we can speak out, show solidarity for something that I think is consistent with what Jesus meant when he said it's appropriate to do good on the Sabbath. So I want to encourage us. Matter of fact, Isaiah 58, this is the kind of fast we're talking about. Let's free some folk today. So this is an opportunity for us not to just speak about it, but to actually act toward it. So let's close with prayer, and then we want to encourage people to head toward Legislative Plaza. Dear Heavenly Father, God, our hearts are heavy. We are discouraged, but we are not defeated, God. I want to thank you for your word that encourages us. I want to thank you that there's strength as we come together and we hear from one another. Lord, I'm praying for the Floyd family, for others who have lost loved ones as a result of police brutality. And God, we're asking that you would help us to model love even in the face of injustice. And then, God, to encourage people to wait for the fulfillment of ultimate justice. God, help us to be you during this season. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.